Hey YouTube, today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite cartridges, and it seems like all of them are my favorite cartridges because they all really are my favorite cartridges. I'm a firearms guy. So what we're going to be talking about here today is the 44 Magnum. And before we go any further, I'm going to tell you that all of these examples that I have here to use as examples, they've all been safety checked. There's nothing in any of them, and then as I pick them up, I will show you that they're not loaded. So what we have here, this is a 44 Magnum, and this cartridge was introduced in 1955, and it was introduced by Smith and Wesson. So Smith and Wesson listened to the calls of the public, because the public was taking the regular 44 special cartridge, and which is exactly the same as this, except for it's a little bit shorter the case, and there were some people that were experimenting with hand loading these things up a little bit hotter than they're supposed to, and they were getting great results, ballistic results in velocity and penetration, and they called upon some gun companies to make a more powerful cartridge, and Smith & Wesson answered their call. So in 1955 they introduced this 44 Magnum. Now the reason they didn't use the 45 Long Colt was the actual brass case was a little bit thinner, and the cartridge itself was a little bit dated, and the 44 was a little bit more of a modern case and can handle the higher pressures a little bit more. Now if you take a 44 special, it's very similar, and I know there's going to be some people to argue out there, but it's going to have very similar ballistics and performance as a 45 ACP. This thing is not. So Smith & Wesson came out. I'm going to pick this gun up here. I'm going to show you that there's nothing in it. Smith & Wesson introduced in 1955 the famous Model 29 44 Magnum. Now this one right here is a stainless version of that, and this is called the Model 629, and this one is also chambered in 44 Magnum. Now the only difference in this one and the one that was introduced in 1955 was this does not have the flutes in the cylinder, and this one offers a full underlug, and the main difference is going to be the finish. This one's made in stainless, and the ones that came out in 1955 were carbon steel, and they had a real pretty blue finish on them. So they also offered the Model 29 in nickel. This is a stainless one, and I'll show you some of the side marks on it where you can see it says 44 Magnum on the side, and on the other side it just says Smith & Wesson, and it has a Smith & Wesson insignia. Now these things were greatly popular right when they came out, and when you get a 44 Magnum cartridge, you can expect to get anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 feet per second out of like a 240 grain bullet. And folks, that's moving for a bullet that size. That is buzzing along. Now, what really made the thing famous was the fact that it was the most powerful handgun in the world. And in the 1970s, Clint Eastwood made a series of movies called Dirty Harry, and he carried a Smith & Wesson 6-inch Model 29 and blued, very similar to this, and he referenced that it was the most powerful handgun in the world, and I think he pretty much has a patent on that, and it was the most powerful handgun in the world until the 1980s when the 454 Gasol overtook it. Now they have this big old X frame in the Smith & Wessons. They would shoot the 500 and 460 and all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's several handguns now that are a little bit more powerful than a 44 Magnum, but up until the 80s, this was the most powerful handgun in the world. And Dirty Harry was single-handedly responsible for making this probably one of the most popular handguns ever. Now, soon after the 44 Magnum came out in 1955, rumor has it that Ruger obtained one of these cartridges here, and they immediately made the decision that they were going to compete with Smith & Wesson, and they were going to make a 44 Magnum, and they did. In 1956 or 1957, somewhere along those lines, they came out with the Ruger Blackhawk. And the Ruger Blackhawk was a single action only revolver chambered in .44 Magnum, and it's been around a long time, folks. And in the 1970s, when you couldn't get your hands on one of these because of the Clint Eastwood Dirty Harry movies, a lot of people went and bought the Ruger Super Blackhawk because they wanted to have a handgun chambered in .44 Magnum because it was the most powerful handgun in the world. So it's really popular. They've also made, Marlin started making rifles in the 50s that was chambered in .44 Magnum because you can actually do a lot of hunting with them. You can hunt deer with them, you know, medium-sized game, and they have a great velocity. Now, what makes these guns really versatile is they have an extremely large amount of recoil because it's such a powerful cartridge, but you can also shoot .44 Special in them as well, and the recoil has cut down quite a bit when you shoot .44 Specials out of them, but you're also going to lose a lot of velocity and a lot of power, and that's why the .44 Magnum was made anyway. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is this .44 Magnum cartridge was lengthened. All it is a .44 Special cartridge that they've made longer, and a lot of people think that's just to put the extra powder in for the extra charge that it's required, and that's actually not true, folks. The reason they did this is because this thing runs a lot more pressure. A .44 Magnum bullet actually has more velocity at 150 yards than a .44 Special does at the muzzle, and that is the absolute truth. So what they did is they made this case a little bit longer so it actually physically would not fit in a gun that was only chambered and built to handle the .44 Special, because there's a big power difference. Now, we did a video a little bit a while ago on the .357 Magnum and how it's really versatile. You can shoot 38 Specials out of it for a fraction of the cost. Well, that's not true so much with the .44 Magnum. 44 Special ammo probably costs about the same, and it's actually harder to find than .44 Magnum. But if you can find it, if you just want to spend the money, it is a lot pleasurable to shoot at the range because the recoil is tremendously reduced. So that is one big advantage to it. But this is a very powerful round, folks, and it was deemed the most powerful handgun in the world for many years, 40 or 50 years, and it actually lives up to its name. Now, we got a couple other ones here, and Smith & Wesson's always been in direct competition with Colt. And the same year that this Model 29, well, this is a 629, but the same year that Smith & Wesson introduced the .44 Magnum is when Colt came out with the Colt Python, which is probably the most famous .357 Magnum. And a lot of people complained about why didn't they make it in .44 Magnum, because Smith & Wesson actually had a leg up on them. Now, remember, folks, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Smith & Wesson is 100% responsible for coming out with the .44 Magnum cartridge. Without them, none of these guns would exist. So in 1955, Smith & Wesson's trump to the Colt Python was to come out with the .44 Magnum, and they introduced this gun here, only in carbon steel. And so Colt never made their premium revolver, the Colt Python, in .44 Magnum, and they never made any gun in .44 Magnum, is what a lot of people don't understand, until the year 1990. They came out with the Colt Anaconda, and these two guns here are Colt Anacondas, and these are actually the new model ones. Now, the Colt Anaconda was released in 1990, and I think it was because they had to do it. They were trying to save face, and Colt really was in some financial struggles at the time. They had a strike going on, and their revolver sales were diminishing some, and they came out with a .44 Magnum called the Colt Anaconda. And I'm going to pick this middle one up here and show you that this is not loaded. And what they did is they put a full fitted rib on it and a full underlug on it and made it look very similar to the Colt Python. Now, I have a video that compares the newer Colt Anaconda. This one here, as a matter of fact, to an older Colt Anaconda, and the quality wasn't there, folks. The older ones, the ones in 1990s, had a coil spring action inside here, and these newer ones have a leaf spring action. So they got out of the revolver game altogether in around 1999, so they didn't make the 44 Magnum very long. And in 2017, they started making revolvers again, and I wondered myself if they were going to make a Colt Anaconda to live up to the new pythons. So in 2020, when they came out with that new python, I didn't think they'd ever going to be able to do it. And when I got my hands on one, I actually own one now, that I was pleasantly surprised that the action was just as smooth as the Colt Python. So what they did is they took the new, simpler action in the new pythons, and they just exploded it and made it into this Colt Anaconda. So the grips off of all the pythons will fit on these new Anacondas, and they wouldn't fit on the old ones because it was a completely different gun. And this gun is far superior to anything that Colt ever made in the 90s, made in 44 Magnum. And this action is so smooth on it. The lockup's just as tight. The double action is just so smooth on it. It's just unbelievable, folks. They did such a good job on it. So it took Colt 50 years to get into the 44 Magnum game, and in my opinion, they failed when they did it. But they resurrected here a couple years ago when they came out with this new model Colt Anaconda chambered in 44 Magnum, and I'll show you the other side of it. It just has the Colt markings and all that kind of stuff. And this is how this gun comes. I did change the grips on it, but this is how this gun comes from the factory with this kind of finish on it. It's just unbelievable. And I also have the 4 1/4 inch one here. I'm going to show you that this one's not loaded too, but this is also a Colt new model Anaconda. This one just came out last year, and the 4 1/4 inch one, it is equally as smooth, and the double action is equally as smooth, and the single action is equally as crisp and superb. But really neat to have a 4 1/4 inch 44 Magnum large frame revolver. And once again, I changed the grips on this one. This one's got a little bit different grips than the other one on it. But the 44 Magnum is just a very awesome cartridge. It's a very powerful cartridge, and it's nothing to be taken lightly. It is not something you need to take your 120-pound girlfriend to the range and say, hey, I want you to hold this in one hand and let me videotape it for Instagram or TikTok. It's not anything to joke around with, folks. It's a very powerful round, but it's a very awesome round. It can be used in a variety of rifles. It can be used for hunting. It can be used for self-defense. Now, they were never very popular with law enforcement, even in this shorter configuration here, because the recoil is so massive on one, especially on a gun this with this shorter barrel, that you're going to have a lot of hard times doing follow-up shots with them. And it's just such a powerful round. It's just kind of overkill. You're going to get over penetration. You got to be very careful with a 44 Magnum if you were using it for self-defense on what's on the other side of the wall, because this son of a gun is going to go through that wall, folks, and it's going to do it with a vengeance. Very powerful round, but a very cool round. But as cool as these two Colts look in 44 Magnum, Smith & Wesson is the one that was responsible for bringing out the 44 Magnum. They get 100% credit for doing it, and they're the reason why any 44 Magnum gun exists. So I just wanted to do this quick video. I've been doing a couple of videos here lately about favorite cartridge sizes and calibers of mine, and I just use a couple of examples in each one of the videos. And folks, I'm not a historian, nor am I a scientist, but I do know enough to be dangerous, and I do know I like the 44 Magnum. If you have any questions on any of these firearms, I have individual videos on each one of them. And if you have any questions on the 44 Magnum, which is what this video is about, feel free to ask. I'll do my best to answer. I usually answer every single person's questions, and I respond to every single person's comments. But anyway, folks, thank you very much for watching my video today, and you folks have a great day.